How we do this, we are the truest. Got these fangs super sharp, your shit toothless. Cold-hearted, yeah we ruthless. All the ghouls in the cut, let's get ghoulish. In the graveyard, acting foolish. Finna dance with the devil to no music. Cold-hearted, yeah we ruthless. All the ghouls in the cut, let's get ghoulish.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of a little podcast I like to call Ghoulish. I am Max Booth, an undead host, and on today's program I have yet another live episode from the Ghoulish Book Fest that happened at the end of April 2022. On this panel, we were talking about DIY DIY for all you, people who don't understand things. It means do it yourself. You could Google that to confirm it. I'm not lying to you, though. It means do it yourself. So if you're someone who likes to do it yourself, hey, you've downloaded the right episode. It's a great panel discussion. I'm not involved in it, so you know it's going to be pretty educational then, and not just a bunch of stupid dick jokes. It's pretty educational about self-publishing, indie publishing, how to get noticed with a new audience. It's a really good conversation. I think anyone who's interested in publishing should listen to it. It's gonna teach you a few things, maybe even 3 things. I don't know. Brian Asman is the moderator on this episode. He did a great job. The panelists include Jay Wilburn, Tom Deady, Eve Helms, and Cynthia Pelayo. Great cast of folks. They know their shit, and it's a pleasure to listen to them talk about the craft. Yeah. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. They do talk. One thing they talk about is the significance of building a newsletter. So I thought it would be appropriate for me to plug my own newsletter in this intro. If you go to pmmpnews.com, that will redirect you to the Ghoulish newsletter, and I also have a link to it in the show notes of the episode. The newsletter is called The Ghoulish Times, and you can also find it by going to theghoulishntimes.substack.com. And that is mostly a weekly newsletter where I do some roundup of news going on in the publishing, in my publishing industry, and my own writing. And sometimes I like to talk about other spooky things if I have the time to write up little mini essays about them. And I think it's a fun newsletter. We have quite a few subscribers, but hey, I'm always game for picking up a few more. And while you're at it, you could rate and review this podcast on iTunes. Spread the good spooky build. Yeah, that's all I gotta say. Now, kick back and enjoy. I don't know what you're kicking back, but maybe don't kick anything. Just don't move and listen to this episode. Thank you.
All right. Hey, how's it going, everyone? We're here to talk professionalism in horror. That's why I'm so late. No, just kidding. This is the DIY horror panel. So let's just go ahead and maybe start at the end with Jay, and we'll just go down the line, and everyone can introduce themselves. Try to keep it under 30 seconds or over 6 minutes.
Oh, jeez Louise. That's a lot of math.
Right. Just kidding. No, just do your thing. I'm just
All right. All right, my name is Jay Wilburn. I guess in the do-it-yourself range, I've done self-publishing. I do Patreon. I'm on Twitch, so I live stream writing horror. Made that an income source. Godless is a platform that it kind of helps with do-it-yourself horror too, and I've taken advantage of that as well.
So you would say you like to do it yourself?
I'm on here for a reason, I guess. Yeah.
My name is Tom Deady. I write horror fiction, novels, short stories, speculative fiction. Not sure why I'm on the panel, but I guess we'll figure it out as we go along.
I think we need another warm body, and you count it.
Yep.
Right.
Hi, I'm Eve Harms. I'm a horror writer, and I also am a zinester. And I started an organization to kind of help new people make zines and encourage people who are already making zines to get their work out. And yeah, so sometimes I literally fold and staple my work and put it out there. Very
Nice.
DIY. I don't know why I'm justifying why I'm on the panel. But
Yeah, I think you're the one who deserves to be here the most.
Oh, stop.
Not this poser.
So, my name is Cynthia. You might know me by Cynthia Pelayo. I'm a 3-time Bram Stoker Award nominated author. I'm an International Latino Book Award winning author. I've been nominated for the Elgin Award a few times. I've self-published. I've indie published. I've been an indie author indie horror author, I want to say since like 2008. So indies are like my home, and that's where, like one of my Bram Stoker Award nominations is a self-published book, Into the Forest and All the Way Through, a poetry collection. So I like to do things on my own, and I don't like people telling me what to do. So I think that's why I'm here.
Awesome. And I'm Max Booth III, author of The Richard Nicholas Maggot Screaming, among other things. I Touch Myself at Night. What was that book called? Something like that. And Brian Asman, author of Man, Fuck This House, which you can buy down in the gift shop with a low price of $10. It comes personalized. You can also buy everyone else's shit downstairs. Please go spend money after this. We're all very broke. All right. So let's, I think it probably start at this end. We'll go down to this end, and then we'll come back. So that's kind of generally the way I'm going to work it. Just kind of like this, like sliding from one end of the table to the other. But if someone has something really interesting to say, please jump in. There will also be time for questions at the end, but if you have a really, really pressing question and you're sure you won't look stupid by asking it, please raise your hand and I will call on you. That was specifically for Danger Slater. All right. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, Danger Slater, author of Moonfellows, which you cannot yet buy downstairs, but will be if we convince Max to do this again next year. All right, let's start with Jay. So let's just define what we're talking about. So how would you define, or let me put on my Ali G voice, what is DIY aura?
Well, I think the modern history of horror has been, well, not just horror in general, but the genre of fiction has been sort of this division of distribution by technology. So you get into like the first ebooks and things of that nature, and slowly you're coming up with more and more ways to sell it. And it's usually to the chagrin of traditional publishing, and usually to an extent maybe to the failures of traditional publishing. So like when you get into self-publishing and you get into, you know, a lot of the live streaming platforms that really took off during the pandemic and other things of that nature, you're kind of, I think the nice word for it is democratizing the distribution of horror. Godless became a thing during the pandemic as well. And you're coming up with more ways to reach an audience, but you're also, it tends to be that those ways bring money to the writer faster and in larger percentages. So I think do-it-yourself horror is kind of taking it into your own hands, maybe bypassing the gatekeepers, although I do think gatekeepers do serve an important purpose. But you kind of come up with ways to do that, and it sort of changes the flavor of horror too. So your more extreme authors, you're seeing more of their stuff, and you're seeing them experiment more because they don't have to convince a publisher to take it. You know, they can just write it as wild and gross as they want, and there's definitely an audience for it, and I think that's starting to show too.
What is an audience?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'll let you know.
So, Tom, you have kind of a unique story behind your DIY effort, right?
Yeah, so unfortunately I think the DIY situation is more out of necessity necessity for a lot of horror authors now. There's no more six-figure advances. There's no more publishers spending big money on marketing. Whether or not you're traditionally published, indie published, self-published, it's DIY. Haven was originally published by a company called Cemetery Dance, which is kind of a niche boutique publisher that specializes in limited edition hardcover, and they recently got into the ebook market, well, recently meaning 5 or 6 years ago. So when they bought Haven, they bought hardcover limited edition rights and ebook rights. The hardcover sells out. I can't sell ebooks at conventions, so I self-publish the paperback version, which it's very unique. In the old days, paperback rights were huge. That's where authors made a lot of money. And it's kind of funny now that Cemetery Dance didn't even want it, and I had to self-publish just so I could have books to sign at events like this.
Eve, so what attracts you about DIY publishing?
So one thing that people always say is that they want to bring more diversity into publishing, right? But it doesn't really happen unless there's a change at the top, or it happens from like the bottom up, right? So when people have the tools to do it themselves, they can start to create their own power structures and their own ways of getting the work out in their own communities of, writers who support each other and artists who support each other. And Godless is like a great example because it's the kind of work that a traditional publisher just wouldn't touch. And one of the great things about horror is that we're not respectable. We're not something like the whole thing with like elevated horror, right? That's more for film, but that's their way to say, oh, okay, well, this is the good horror, and then the rest is the gross stuff we don't want to touch,
Yeah.
So I think Brian King was telling me about how, zines were huge during that bust in the 90s, the horror bust, and it kind of kept it going. It was like the embers of the fire before it kind of came back. So I think it's kind of the foundation of horror in a lot of ways.
Yeah, definitely. Sina, you talked a little about it in your intro, but what attracts you about DIY publishing?
I think I could talk about this for days. Like you all said, in terms of like big publishing, I think a lot of us probably don't write what big publishing would like to commercialize as horror, and I think there is commercial horror, and there is indie horror, right, for several reasons. Because when you think about it, when you're looking at a mass audience for commercial, and things have changed substantially. In the 80s and 90s, people were making money, tons of monies in the paperbacks. Paperbacks were like paying for people's mortgages. All of that is no longer available. And so I think that we're living in a very exciting time right now with indies, because you have indie authors that can make, I have a few friends that they support themselves or at least have a nice supplemental income with the indies. For myself, I started writing horror at a time where it was like, oh, you're Latina and you're writing horror, what are you doing? And so at least for me, no one had, at that time in 2008, there really was, besides J.F. Gonzalez, he was like the only Latinx horror writer at the time, and now you have me and Violet and Gabino, and there's a ton of others. But back then, I was just, no one would listen to me, and I had to just start self-publishing. So I self-published for a long, long time, and I still have that identity, and I know I know I have the award noms, and I know I have an agent now, and I think that's where my agent and I have like butted heads, because I came up from the indies, and this is my home, and these are my people, and so you can create what we're creating in the indies. People are looking at us, all right? These guys that are making millions of dollars, that are getting these huge book deals, they're reading our books. If you look on Twitter, look at the big name horror authors. What pictures are they posting? They're posting our books. That's what they're looking at. Just like indie music, indie films, indie restaurants, all art is gonna start on an indie scene, and I feel like we're the true artists because we can take risks.
Yeah, absolutely. That's certainly one of the things I love about it personally. All right, I'm going to take a quick break and ask the audience a question. Yeah, guess what? You are all panelists now. So how exciting is that? Let's take a quick survey. How many of you have thought about self-publishing or have self-published something? Oh, hell yeah, a whole bunch of you. Nice. Excellent. Well, you're in the right panel then. So I think I'm going to transition now that we've talked a little bit about like what our motivations are and why self-publishing appeals to us. Let's talk about how we got into it. So I'm going to start with Sina again. So like when you first made that decision, like how did you make those first steps from going like, I want to publish this story myself to actually having something in your hands?
My first novel was published. I was published with Max, with our first. That's how I know Max. I've known Max since 2012, 2013, because we both shared a publisher who's now defunct, Postmortem Press. So it was. I mean, I did the querying thing. I queried like 200-300 people, and nobody wanted it. And an indie press picked up my work, but then from there. My other work, no one was really picking it up, so I started like an indie press called Burial Day, and I just kind of started publishing other people because at that time in 2012, 2013, I wasn't the only person with this problem. Tons of people were like, nobody's publishing me, and I'm like, don't worry, we're gonna figure it out. And so I think that's another thing I guess we could talk about later, but like the spirit of the indies, I think we all support one another tremendously here, as opposed to like big, I don't know. I just know we support each other like hell, because I feel like these are my people and I'm going to support them and they support me. And so, I mean, just figuring it out, like seeing what markets are taking subs. Like right now, there's just so many indie places to publish, which back then there wasn't that many markets.
Yeah, awesome. So Eve, how did you take those first steps into indie publishing?
So when I first got into indie publishing, I was kind of like I was a little obsessed, and I was listening to like all those marketing, like how to self-publish podcasts and like things like that. And I kind of found out that though that may work for some people, you really have to kind of forge your own path. Like getting that kind of advice from like the kind of marketing type people, like you can get useful information from that, but it wasn't really until I kind of started doing the opposite of what they said to do that I kind of got more traction. There's some very, very reasonable things that are brought up, like, print on demand is amazing. It's great. You have someone do all the orders and fulfill everything for you. But there is really something about the connection to the work when you like literally just print it out and put it in an envelope and mail it to a friend. Sometimes it's just a trade. You're not even selling it. And that's kind of where I ended up finding my place and thriving. It's not a place to make money though. Like if you're trying to make money, like don't do this. Like what I just said. Like you can do other things. Maybe you'll find another way. But
get a real estate license.
Yeah.
Which is actually our next panel at 5:30. How to transition from indie publishing to real estate. Sorry, go ahead.
That's a great way to end it.
All right. So, Tom, when you realized, hey, I need to get a paperback version of this book out there, and I'm going to do it myself. Like, how did you approach that? So, like, how did you educate yourself on actually how to even do it?
So I had been doing some research when I had sent out the 100 query letters and tried to get a publisher, tried to get an agent. I had done a ton of research and podcasts and the whole thing about how to self-publish, so I kind of knew the process. I knew about Kindle and all that. But Cemetery Dance, they were really good. They let me use their cover. They helped me format it and do all that for paperback. So I'm still clueless when it comes to doing that, which is fine. And then subsequently, my next novel, Eternal Darkness, when that came out, or when I was ready to try to start shopping that, I still didn't have an agent at the time. There was a new indie press called One Shot Books that was taking their first open call. I said, what the hell? And I sent them the query. And, a lot presses are really almost like self-publishing minus like I don't do the cover art and I don't do the final stage editing and formatting. But I work with Bloodshot Books and I work with Omnium Gatherum and several of my other indie publishers, just like they're my partner more than my publisher. Like I say, hey, I want to try to do a book pub. Can you work with me? I'll pay up front for the book pub if you just put the discounted price in when the date comes due, or I want to try this marketing thing, or I want to try a different cover, and it's really like self-publishing, but with a team of experts that can help me do like the stuff that I don't want to spend my time doing, like cover and formatting and all that stuff.
Yeah. Cool. All right, Jay, you've been at this a long time, so if you can remember back all the way to the beginning.
Let me get my nurse.
Sorry. So, like, when you first got into it, how'd you take those first initial steps to publishing something yourself?
All right. Well, I've been full-time as a writer since 2013, and part of that was health-related. One of my sons got sick, and there was a certain medication we didn't want to have to put him on, and so to get him away from diseases in daycare and that kind of thing, we took him out. I was already disillusioned with being a public school teacher, so I was willing to take the leap to not have a full-time job anymore. So out of necessity, bills come every month, so you have to get money in quickly, which isn't normally how writing works. So I kind of treated it like a financial portfolio where you diversify. So I had stuff with publishers. I started self-publishing some things. I did some ghost writing. I do freelance articles. And that's kind of been a theme through all the way through to the present, where I write for Lit Reactor now. I write for something that Crystal Lake Publishing does. Still do a little bit of ghost writing, but not as much, and I demand more money for it now than I used to.
Hell yeah.
And then I always kind of have that throw it at the wall and see what sticks kind of thing, which is not necessarily the best business plan, but sometimes things stick. And I follow Brian Keene on Patreon, and one of the things he said was that if he was 10 years younger, he would be on Twitch. I didn't know what Twitch was at the time, but I started looking into it. It's primarily video games. And then I asked him what he would do on it, and he said kind of use it as sort of more interactive YouTube. And then I just started writing on it, and that became an income source. So some of it is just trying to find what hasn't been saturated by authors yet, because usually what happens is a few people get in and they do well, and then everybody rushes in after it's kind of already swinging. So my goal has always kind of been to be in that first 10 to 20%, as opposed to the rush in that comes later. And I've kind of over time I've sort of redefined what publishing means in terms of engaging the audience. So in terms of live streaming your writing, that's not any kind of model that any publisher really has. But I'm putting writing out there. People are paying me money for it, so that's kind of how I want this to work. So sort of all through time, it's kind of been sort of this just, there's something new out there, let me see if I can do something with it. Either it works or it doesn't. And then that idea of continually diversifying for when, one income source dries up or slows down or goes dead, then you have these other things in the works. And a lot of them are slow builds. So it takes time to build up. So you kind of want to be building things up while other things are still working instead of waiting for them to fail. So I've always kind of been playing that game all the way through publishing in terms of financing my full-time writer lifestyle by just trying to get ahead of certain things, figure out what works for me, and then just making enough money to pay my bills every month, mostly on time.
Hell yeah. Nice.
I think that's a really good point too, that diversifying, you don't, just because you're doing things yourself doesn't mean every single project you do has to be the ground up.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not like a binary choice. It's something you can do to supplement just even like a traditional publishing career.
Yeah, that's something that I've both traditionally published and self-published stuff, and I feel like that is, if you have the aptitude for it, that's the ideal model, because you can do projects where you have complete creative control over everything. but you can also have stuff that has, there's still a stigma, so you get that, like a little bit of that cachet by traditionally publishing as well, and can expand your audience. So I want to ask, I'll start with Sina now. If you could go back to when you first started doing DIY publishing, what's a piece of advice you wish you could give your younger self?
Pay for an editor.
Yeah.
And if not, I know, like, you know, cash is tight. If you couldn't pay for an editor, see if there was something, you know, like, we traded books, right? There are other creators that maybe there's something that you could have contributed for them. Like, maybe I'll beta read for you and you can help beta read for me. But I would have involved more people to look at my work, because my earlier work was a mess with like typos, and that's what I would have pushed.
Nice. I think that's a good lesson.
Yeah.
Eve?
I guess the same. And then also what I was talking about with, with kind of just making sure to, whatever efforts you do, that it feels right. It feels like it's you. You know, like, it's really easy to get seduced by wanting to be a full-time creative, and that's the goal, but it has to be sustainable, so it has to be, you know, true to yourself, at least in some ways. There's, you know, more of the, there's like the more like kind of grunt work or contract work you can take on, but you always have to make sure that there's a core of you in like what you do. So yeah.
Sweet. All right. How about you, Tom?
I think, and you've probably heard this in every seminar or convention you've gone to, but even if you haven't written your first word yet, start building your platform now. Get involved with different social media platforms. Get involved with attending events like this. Reach out to your favorite authors. Most authors, indie authors at least, are very accessible on social media. Don't be afraid to pick people's brains. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Just kind of get in with the genre even before you've got anything to publish, and then your name won't be, you won't be the guy saying, hey, accept my friend request, now buy my book. Like, nobody wants to be that guy. So if you're already in with the crowd, kind of, they're more likely to accept you when you do have a work out there.
Yeah, I think the pro editor one is the most important thing. I don't even know why that's still a debate, but it is among people. So if you didn't hear anything else, that would be it. I think one thing that would have helped me, and it sounds like it's the opposite of that, but it's not, because you still treat everything like a pro. But I wish that I had learned earlier that it's okay to do something badly until you get good at it. So like any new genre you want to write, like steampunk was one that I had trouble with at first, and the only way to get good at it was to write it badly for a while. Now, you don't have to publish every bad thing you write, but I think you got to write the bad things in order to figure out how to make it good, but it helps to recognize when it's bad. And the improvement then, I think, in a lot of things, and especially taking on new platforms and new technologies, is to start where you are and then just gradually make 1% improvements. So like, you can get overwhelmed by watching like YouTube videos that show best practices, and now there's 45 things you have to apply to be good at something, and you get paralyzed by fear at that point. But I think if you take the philosophy of 1% improvement, where like, I can't fix all of this stuff, but I can fix this one thing, and that's going to make it markedly improved. And sometimes a lot of the peripheral things that aren't working get fixed by that one little thing that you did, and then you're in a position where your next 1% improvement's way up here as opposed to down there. And I think that also keeps it from being overwhelming. So like, if you're deciding you're going to format your own book, or you're deciding that you're going to write a novel when you've only written short stories before, I think that idea of not being afraid to do it badly the first time, and then just that 1% improvement will just be huge. And then you'll reach a point where you'll look back and recognize how bad that stuff was, maybe even be embarrassed by it, but that was the stepping stone to get to where you wanted to be down the road.
Yeah, I'm embarrassed by a lot of things,
I'm
frankly.
laughing because I'm embarrassed by my earlier stuff.
Yeah, second that. Like, I think not being not being afraid to try things is just really key to whether you want to be a DIY writer or whether you want to work with traditional publishers or what. It's how you grow. So here's a question. So I feel like there's a lot less stigma now with self-publishing than there used to be 10 years ago, 15 years ago. It's increasingly become like a more legitimate way of publishing. And I think we see that in that there are indie books getting picked up by major studios, things like that. Indie books getting into bookstores now. I see a lot of, in the Books of Horror group, for example, I see a lot of here's a Barnes & Noble, and here's all these self-published books in their indie section right next to Stephen King. Right? So that it's definitely less of a stigma, but it still kind of persists in some ways. So how do we increase the credibility of self-publishing? And I will start with Eve this time.
I don't think we need to. Sorry, I just.
No, it's okay. We're up here to debate and disagree.
Okay, well then I'm going to disagree.
Yeah.
I think our strength is that we're not the big guys, and we're not necessarily legitimate. And I think there's a lot of people who are interested in that. I see so many people on TikTok who are basically they just read everything on Godless, and they love it. They love every disgusting, crazy thing that's on that platform. And if that was suddenly I don't know, let's say Godless was bought by Amazon. I don't think those people would be as excited about it.
Yeah, but I wasn't really advocating for that. I was saying
You were
more.
advocating for this.
No, not at all. I was saying more regardless of the specific subject matter or material. I think I still see a lot of comments online at times about people going, I don't read self-published books because they're all garbage. So it's more of how do we reach those people? How do we get those people? How do we continue pushing the acceptability of just to the average reader, right? Just to expand the
I don't think we
audience.
should try to reach those people because they're not the people who want the new stuff.
I don't want those people.
I'll take them.
I think we don't have to make things for everybody.
Right.
Right.
It's okay to make things for the people who want that, the tastemakers,
Yes,
you know?
it's okay to make. There is an allure to what we do. We have an audience, I feel, because there is an allure, because we can push boundaries that they cannot access elsewhere. And there's we see Twitter and we think that that's it. Twitter is the social media platform. No, the reading public is huge.
Yeah.
That's why coming to events like this, having a newsletter, connecting with your local library and doing talks you will be surprised at the audience that you will meet. My biggest readers of Children of Chicago weren't even necessarily people that I thought were going to be. It was people outside of Twitter. I've been getting emails from people all over the place, of people that aren't even on social media, and that surprised me. And so I think that, again, there's an allure to what we do, and people think it's cool because we can push boundaries.
I think that's a great point. When you get into marketing, they often try to push you away from horror because if you look at the total population, it doesn't compare to crime fiction or it doesn't compare to romance. But being a full-time author, the trick is I don't need all those readers. I just need some of them. So It doesn't matter that there's 12 million more romance readers. I don't need all 12 million of them.
Right.
I need a couple thousand horror readers, and then I can get by. And then if I can make that a few thousand, that's even better. But
And if you write a range within your preferred area, I write crime, I write poetry. My crime readers don't necessarily for example, my poetry readers will not read my crime. My crime
Right.
readers will not read my horror. And so I can tap into different audiences, and I know that too. So if there is an area that you like, you can kind of go out a little bit, that you don't make your people too mad, but that can expand your audience as well.
Right. So just by stretching your own writing, you're expanding your audience naturally, basically, right?
So I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying, but I think you were focusing on content of where the stigma came from. But in my mind, the stigma of self-publishing came from just poor quality, whether it's lack of editing or
Covers.
ugly
Bad
covers
covers, yeah.
or
Yeah.
The
poorly
form.
written synopsises,
Yeah.
things like that.
Good God, Google Empress Teresa if you have never done that, and look at the cover and read the synopsis. I swear, it's a sight to behold.
Yeah, so
Sorry, Nazir.
no, that's fine. I just think I think there is still a stigma because people still stumble on these really badly written, unedited books and think, well, that's what self-publishing is, even though it isn't.
And it can be a perfect, beautiful, every word can be perfect, but if it's not formatted as a
That
book,
too, exactly. Yes.
readers get so turned off if you formatted it incorrectly. They
Yes.
will call it out. So that's why there's a lot of, there's Scrivener now, there's Vellum, that we have access to platforms. Before we didn't have,
Right.
we had to just do it all in Word and space it all out.
I do think there's something really different happening right now in horror that I don't think we have a handle on yet, and I think a lot of it has to do with the pandemic. And I've only started going to conventions again after a couple years here just recently, and I'm seeing tons and tons of authors who are kind of born out of the pandemic, where they basically spent 2 years, either this is the first time they wrote, or this is the first time they published, or this is the first time they got noticed by an audience, and suddenly these new authors that are really, really, really good are kind of flooding into the conventions and stuff again. And they're some of the best writers I've ever seen. Now, some of them didn't just start writing 2 years ago, but that's where their big audience growth came. And where I talk about, like, I wrote badly before I wrote good, so I have some bad books in my catalog. I'll look at some of these people and there are no bad books, and it kind of bothers me. Like, I really wish their first book was worse, But I think there's this flood of talent in horror writing right now that I don't even know what impact it's going to have. But I look around at, I guess younger is the right word, younger writers than me who are just wildly talented, who are just now getting noticed. And I think the horror reader may have changed too, because you talk about groups like Books of Horror and some groups like that, and you think, well, it's just a Facebook group, but they have an actual impact on the success of conventions, and they have an actual impact on the success of books and authors. And that's huge, that the readers have kind of taken ownership of it, and they're not following market forces, they're setting them up. And I don't know that that's been the case before, and I think I have to think it has something to do with the pandemic, kind of putting a halt and a restart to a lot of things. But it's almost like the whole scene is different, and nobody really understands why yet or how. And it's things like Godless and like Books of Horror and some things like that have sort of changed who the authors are and have changed who the readers are.
Yeah.
And eventually people are going to try and figure out that market and try to capitalize on it. But I think we're at a point where no one really understands why it is the way it is, and you just kind of have these hints that things are different, but we don't really know why yet.
Yeah, heck yeah.
Yeah, like those TikTok review accounts I was talking about. There's the perception that kind of the really gross, transgressive stuff is the stuff that guys like. But these are all women.
Yeah.
All these accounts I'm talking about.
Right.
And I don't think necessarily it's like a new audience, but it's definitely one that people don't expect or hasn't really seen as much.
Right. Yeah, I see a lot of women in Books of Horror talking about the sloppy poo-poo, as they call it, so. All right, so we're getting a little bit short on time. I want to save some time for audience questions. But so last question for our panelists. What are some resources you would recommend for anyone thinking about self-publishing? Whether it's like websites with articles, podcasts, or just, people just to follow who have insights. Sina?
I'm going to pass.
Yep.
I need to think about this one.
Okay.
Let me think about this one.
Eve?
So, if you want to just kind of learn about the nuts and bolts of the process and get some kind of more traditional marketing advice, The Creative Pen is a really good podcast and website. Joanna Penn runs it, and she interviews tons of different people, and there's lots of information there. But I think the best experience is the best. Make a zine. Take a piece of paper, fold it into 8, and start writing something on it. You know, like post your stuff on Facebook. Just post a story on Facebook. Don't wait to put your stuff out there until you feel like you understand everything. You learn along the way. Don't get obsessed like I did and learn all the marketing stuff and then like try to apply it.
Tom, Jay?
Yeah, another something that was already mentioned is the tool Scrivener. Really helpful in helping you write and format. But yeah, to each point, just get out there. I didn't publish my first book till I was in my 50s, and I have a lot of regret about that. So don't wait, just do it.
Yeah, in terms of resources, I like Lit Reactor. Now, of course, I write for them, so I guess that's a caveat there. But there's a lot of like really good authors who do articles and stuff for them on the subject of writing. I've enjoyed being on Twitch as a viewer. It's primarily a video game platform, but there's a number of writers on there. A lot of them are new, but I enjoy just having them on in the background, and you can actually talk to people while they're writing and talk about process. And a lot of times the discussion in chat is almost as useful as anything else, because other people come on, and I've learned about certain conventions and other things that are going on there live. I like what Brian Keene puts out, so his newsletter, his blog. I support him on Patreon because I like what he puts up there. So he's a good resource. These conventions are a good resource. I went to AuthorCon in Virginia, and just even as an author that kind of feels like I have some of it figured out at least, I learned a lot just by hanging out and absorbing from some of the other authors that have been at it longer than I have. And frankly, talking about the new guys that have kind of come out in this last couple years, I'm learning all kinds of stuff from them because they're kind of ahead of the curve on a bunch of things. So I pick their brains and steal their ideas and stuff. I tell them I'm going to steal their ideas as soon as we start talking. But so I think, especially now that conventions are starting up again, I think it's a really solid resource to just get that indirect. Networking is sometimes the word for it, but it's not even like just finding a publisher. It's just that idea of like, oh, here's all the mistakes I've made and how I've done them. And sometimes that's the conversation at the bar as opposed to the actual panel. And you'll pick up something gold there, even if the gold is like, this publisher is terrible and they've mistreated me, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I think those things are just invaluable, and you can't really quantify those things. It's just the physical act of being at a convention puts you in contact with some resources that you wouldn't even point out. And even after the convention, you may not realize that's the most important thing you learned the whole time you were there.
Yep.
One other thing I wanted to mention is start a newsletter. I know it sounds old-fashioned with social media out there, but the social media platforms can change their rules, change their algorithms anytime they want, and you might not have people seeing all your posts and all your content. But if you have that newsletter, you own those names and emails, and they're going to see your content unless they opt out. But you have control over what they see and what they don't see. So I would always recommend starting a newsletter.
Yeah, I would second that. I started one this year and really should have done it sooner. And it is kind of the old school thing, but the tools for it have changed a lot.
Yep.
So you can do a higher quality piece. And my advice on that would be to get onto the newsletters of authors that you really like and see what they're doing well, and then kind of gear yours towards that, and you can kind of figure out what works and what doesn't.
All right, good stuff. All right, we got a couple minutes. Oh, you look like you wanted to say something.
I was just going to say, you can't be banned from email.
Yeah, that's very true.
There you go.
All right, we have a couple minutes left, so I wanted to throw it out to the audience. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to raise a hand. Yes.
Sorry, the Air Force wants to
No, stand.
Brian, we chatted about this downstairs a little bit, but I hear some yeses. We were talking about the Books of Horror Facebook group, and of course your book blew up there. It's like one of 5 that kind of keeps on surfacing. So just tips you told me, I think might be valuable for this audience about like how you were able to achieve that.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm not a great marketer myself, but what I truly believe when you're going to publish something is to really put your best foot forward. And so that means, as we've talked about, pro editing, pro layouts, get an eye-catching cover, and honestly put the word fuck in your title, because then people will just be shocked and like talk about it. But no, seriously, the book's had legs because it's, I've done all those things, right? So it's not just a provocative title. That's what gets people's attention, but then people share the book and talk about the book because of the story in it, So I really think if you create the best product possible, there's no guarantees with anything, but that's honestly the best thing that you can do is create that best product. And think about generally, and when I say best product, that also means telling stories that only you can tell in ways that have not been told before. So you can create the greatest vampire book ever, but if you don't have a unique spin or twist on it, and it's literally just Dracula all over again, it's not. It might catch fire, but it probably won't. So it's just thinking about how to show people something new. I think really helps. Anyone else?
Can I interject?
Yes.
As a main member of
Hey, let her talk.
Oh yeah, this I'm telling you as a BOH person, if you get in with Karina, well not me, because if you look and see that the girls that are doing main reviews in there, and if you can review from them, send them an arc, something like that, that will elevate you like that.
Yep.
That's what you got, Twitter set hollow, stuff like that. Once you get it into the main, there's 5 girls, and they will, just watch for a week or 2, just watch BOH, and it's that easy.
Yeah. I think often just indirect promotion can be really helpful too. Just essentially, when people just see your name, see you showing up to things, see you engaging with people, and not trying to sell books, just being cool. Eventually they'll check out your stuff. Well, they see your name here, see your name there, and eventually, things happen. So I'd say one thing that you really don't want to do though is only engage with people when you're pushing your book. That's a real surefire way to shoot yourself in the foot.
I mean, we write to connect with people, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that has to show. If people see that all you're trying to do is show your book, then is that book for them? It sounds like it's more for you, right? You need to want to have a genuine connection with people.
Yeah. And also, do not under any circumstances hire fucking Henry Roy PR. I swear indie authors keep hiring this stupid company, and all they do is send people DMs, and apparently the guy's in prison for murder. Do not hire them. They are not a real PR company.
That's notoriety right there.
Yeah, you don't get those?
I have no idea what you're talking about. But I'm
No, it's a Twitter thing.
Oh, I haven't gotten it.
Oh, I get it all the time on Twitter. It's hi, this is a different name each time from Henry Roy PR. We have advanced copies of this particular book from whoever, and I'm don't do this. Yeah. Right, any other? Yes, in the back. What's that? I don't know. Someone was telling me this on Twitter the other day, and I'm this seems like something a murderer would do. How can I be more depraved as a human? Yeah, start a fake PR company for self-pub writers. Yeah.
He murdered somebody that badmouthed him at a conference.
Yeah.
That reminds me.
Speaking of murder.
It's called Writers Beware, right?
Yeah, Writers Beware. Yeah,
Lisa.
Victoria Strauss. Yeah, she does, and I think that's actually one last point that brings up that we should make is if you're getting into self-publishing, there are all kinds of companies that will sell you self-publishing packages. Be very careful. Check Writer Beware, like you've said, and just think about what they're offering, and then price out those services on your own if you were buying them ad hoc from different people, right? So just to give you a breakdown, and you guys can chime in too if you want. So for my last novella, I spent probably about $400 on cover art. I spent about $400 on editing, $450 on editing from Max Booth for a 40,000 word book. Spent about $100 on layouts from Lori, and those were kind of my costs, right? So around $1,000. essentially is what you would put in. So if you see a service that's saying, hey, we'll give you this awesome self-publishing package, we'll do layouts and covers, all the stuff that you don't want to worry about, and it's $5,000. That's not worth it. It doesn't add up.
But be nice about it, because some of them are murderers.
Yes.
I'm not asking anybody else to disclose this, but I'll disclose this because I don't care. For Into the Forest, I paid $400 for the cover. I think I paid editing. I paid like $300 to $400 for copy editing. My interior was awful, but whatever. Y'all dealt with it. So that was what, $800, and the book is made like $4,000 or $5,000.
Yeah.
So, and that's all my money. So sometimes, a publisher could have easily given me like a $5,000 advance for that, right?
Yeah.
So that's just an estimate of what I've made from a poetry collection, and it still continues to make money. So yeah, that's just a guesstimate there. Just a little range for you.
Yeah. Cool. One more question, and then I think we have to wrap up actually. So last
so
one.
what about when you go to print that book, though? Like, how much does that cost? If you're printing yourself?
I do on demand through Ingram and through KDP, so it doesn't cost, like they only charge you when they print the book. I don't know if anyone.
I use Ingram and KDP. So on print on demand, that's what I use. Some people might use different. Some people might actually print the physical book. I just print on demand. It's cheaper.
I think if you want to do something that is not amongst Ingram's like usual offerings, then it might make sense to work with another printer. Like if you have a book with like a lot of glossy photographs and stuff, I don't know. I haven't tried to do anything through them, so I don't know how that looks on demand.
Just like an estimate for like a printed, I think, because I just did the StokerCon souvenir books for HWA, and so like that was like a 308-page book, and I believe it was like $4.25 per book from Ingram.
I do.
So
I
that's
do
an estimate.
Haven's on Ingram, and I think I pay, if I just buy like very small quantities, I think they charge me like $7.
So, yeah.
That's a pretty thick
like
book.
a
for a
14
teenager.
It's a big book. Yeah.
I ordered like that was based off, my number was based off of 500 books.
That's a big
so
order,
it's a lot lower cost of $4.25. So if you only ordered by like a few, like 100.
Rolling that into your distribution platform makes sense. So if you're selling it on Amazon anyway, you might as well go through them to get the book and stuff. So however you plan to distribute, it makes sense to put your print cost into that too, since it's going to be there anyway.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming. We're all going to be here for a while, so if you have more questions, approach any of us. But not weirdly. Look for our panelists. Thank you all.
And thank you to our sponsors, Tom Deady, author of Haven and the Clearing, Tenebris Press, an independent publisher of new weird horror from diverse and unsung voices around the world, Bucket of Blood Books and Records, Chicago's premier destination for new and used horror books and movies, Witty Books, an independent bookstore in Tulsa, Oklahoma, specializing in speculative fiction, small press titles, all things spooky. Find them online at wittybooks.com. My Horror Confessional, a horror movie podcast, Nightworms, a horror subscription service, Horror DNA, a horror website, Vic Carey, author of Thorazine Dreams, and Nightfire, publisher of books for the dead, the living, and everyone in between. Nightfire is the new horror imprint from the folks at Tor Books.
Live spooky, die spooky.
Rest in peace, Max.